A Muslim can be lynched today in India on mere suspicion of consuming or trading beef or cattle.
In 2020, Raqib Hameed Naik, a Kashmiri Muslim journalist, went into self-imposed exile after being targeted by the Indian government for his reporting.
He is the founder of HindutvaWatch.org, a real-time data set of human rights abuses, and India Hate Lab, which studies hate speech targeting India's religious minorities in the digital realm and offline spaces.
Both are needed more than ever, especially as India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi won a third consecutive election in June, and the country slides even more into authoritarianism.
We are witnessing a country under siege from Modi's far-right Hindu nationalist ideology.
Raqib's organizations were charged by Indian authorities for allegedly inciting violence, an offense that carries a potential 5-year prison sentence. He's here to tell us about his work and the side of India hardly anyone hears about.
I'm Elisha Maldonado.
And I'm Casey Michelle.
This is Dissidents and Dictators.
Hey there, I wanted to jump in with a quick update. Starting now, we will be releasing new episodes every 2 weeks to bring you even better stories and guests. Be sure to follow us on YouTube and Instagram at Dissidents and Dictators to keep up to date on the latest episodes. We'd also love to hear your thoughts and questions, so reach out to us. Now, back to the show. Elise, how are you today? Before you answer, actually, Elise,
Yeah.
where are you calling from? Where are you? We miss you here in New York.
I am in Old Blighty. I'm in England. I was in London last week, and I'm here with my cousin and his wife in East Sussex and Uckfield, and so calling from their kitchen.
You're calling from their kitchen. Oh, so
Yeah.
you're on just this what, weeks long, months long vacation over in England. You're not doing any work whatsoever.
It's only what I'm doing, actually, and I'm loving it. But I
Well,
do miss you.
okay.
It's not the same not being in the office with you. I miss you.
I share that sentiment. I appreciate it, and all I ask is you bring some British chocolate for me.
I've got
That's
so
the
much
only thing
chocolates for you. So
Oh, that's
many
wonderful.
chocolates.
That's wonderful. I'm already using the lip balm you have left behind, so I guess I'm
Yeah.
just getting a little greedy at
You know,
this point.
My things are your things.
Well, look, I appreciate it. My office is your office, and we can't
True.
wait for you to get back so we can start having these conversations in person. But look, even
yes.
though we're 1,000 miles apart from one another, we still had a great conversation today,
Yeah, we really did.
and I think we have plenty to talk. Like,
I was trying
it's
not to
yes
call.
and you got to be yes and. That's improv 101, baby.
Listen, as you guys will see later in this episode, I go through a coughing fit, and I have to step off camera, which you'll all see, those who are watching. And so, in that moment, I took a swallow just wrongly, and just decided to leave it there. You're welcome.
That's okay. That's what the people come here for more, for that and many more things. We got to keep them entertained. We got to keep them on their toes. But
At
no,
least
look,
it didn't turn into a coughing fit.
no, that's exactly right. But look, we had a lot of ground to cover today. We're talking about a country we haven't talked about on any of the
That's right.
podcast episodes previously. That is India. And we had a great guest with an incredible story who shared many of the details which with us today, some of which I was not expecting whatsoever. So we have plenty to discuss, plenty of ground to cover today in this conversation with Raqib. So I say let's get into it.
Let's get to it, Case. All right. Well, thank you so much for joining us. It's a pleasure to have you and get to actually talk to you a little bit more face to face, since didn't get to see you too much in Oslo this year.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, it's lovely. I would just like to go in, as we always like to start, and ask you to describe your upbringing and your background, and you're from Kashmir. Could you describe that place for people who've never been to it?
I was born in this small but a very beautiful village in Doda. It's a town in the Chenab Valley of Jammu and Kashmir. And our village sat on a hill overlooking the mighty Chenab River, which traverses through various villages and towns. And I mean, when I look back and try to imagine that view, it was truly breathtaking, especially during the winters when it would snow. So I was born in 1995. Though my parents disputed, they say I was born in 1993. But on paper, some 1995. And just 8 years before I was born, in 1987, India rigged the elections in Kashmir, which led to a massive uprising and beginning of an armed insurgency against the Indian rule. And the government's response to this insurgency was extremely severe. They deployed hundreds of thousands of troops, and what followed was a period of massacres, human rights abuses, torture, enforced disappearances, and sexual violence against women. And tens of thousands of Kashmiris have been killed since then, and there are around 8 to 10,000 cases of enforced disappearances as well. And this violence, this oppression, this broader oppression has also translated into what we have personally gone through, my family that has been a direct victim of this violence. My uncle was taken by unknown gunmen, and we later found his body by a river. In 1997, my father was picked up by the army and tortured for 3 days. And I still remember my mom putting a mix of water and turmeric over his wounds to heal. And 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 it's just continued. I mean, in October of 2003, I remember we had a wedding at our home, and I was barely 8 or 9. It was late night when all our relatives and friends were dancing and celebrating on the terrace of my aunt's house, which was right in front of our house. And I was playing there on the side with all my other cousins. And as it was just past 10, two gunmen with their faces covered, they entered and started firing and killed 7 people that day, all family members and family friends. And my cousin Amin, who was then 25, and the only son of the uncle who had been killed years before, he was also one among them. And he was the sole provider for his 5 sisters, my 5 other cousins. Their mother had also passed. And I was there, I witnessed it. And in fact, that scene is very still vivid in my head. Even now, if I close my eyes, I can just replay it all in front of me. So growing up, you know, on one side, you have this place so beautiful, and the other side, you have this reality of living there every day. I mean, that contrast was always part of my life while growing up, and I really couldn't fully grasp the larger political landscape of why was this happening to my family.
Mhm.
And it was not just our family, there were people in our community, many people who were victims of this conflict, this violence. And my family couldn't afford me to send me to good schools. And in fact, no one in my family ever went to a college. My dad worked tirelessly to provide for our family. He was a daily wage laborer, doing everything from getting firewood from a nearby village on a donkey to sell in a nearby town, to working later as a waiter, and in a butcher shop, and then in another restaurant. So the schools I attended barely mentioned the history of Kashmir, or if they did, it was always through that Indian lens, as if we never had our own history.
Right.
And we didn't had internet access back in time, so there was this pervasive sense that certain conversations around Kashmir, around human rights abuses, were forbidden. And if they ever happened, they were always in whispers. And then in 2008, when another uprising erupted in Kashmir, I was almost about 13 or 14, when security forces shot almost dozens of young Kashmiri youths during street protests. And it kind of struck me that, okay, everyone around me seemed to suffer under this system. So what is it that could be causing it? And that was when my curiosity about our history sparked, and a family friend started teaching me some bits. And I was very stunned by the scale of oppression on our people that they had endured throughout their history, our history, and even
Kashmir
before
is
Kashmir's accession to India.
Kashmir is largely Muslim, right?
Muslim majority.
Muslim majority, right? Okay, go on. Sorry.
Yeah. So yeah, and after high school, I moved to Kashmir. So Jammu and Kashmir is divided into three parts. So there's this one division, three divisions actually. Jammu division, which is majority Hindu. Then you have Kashmir division, which is majority Muslim, and then Ladakh, which is partly Buddhist and then Muslims.
Okay.
So I lived in Jammu region, which is where Dora district is, and after I moved to Kashmir to study political science, and in Srinagar, the summer capital of Kashmir, I found my first real political classroom. And it was there I connected with my roots, my history, and that collective experience of oppression and dispossession shared by every Kashmiri.
So Raqib, you're being born into this situation. You see your family and friends go through all of these different elements of repression year after year, and all of this is seared into your memory. Some of these you're seeing firsthand. You are growing in your education and in your conversations, more and more interested in the history of the region, and of course the kind of history that you were not taught as a child. But where does the interest in journalism come from you? Is there a specific teacher? Is there a specific moment or memory when you see the skill set of journalism, the publication, the sharing of these conversations and of these developments, not only with other Kashmiris, but with the broader world as well? Is there a specific moment you can point to, or was it just kind of building year in, year out until you woke up one day and you realized, oh, I am doing what all journalists are doing, sharing stories, shining a light, and not backing down from more powerful forces that are trying to repress the region?
I think for me, it was a continuous process. Kashmir is the most militarized zone in the world right now, with one soldier for every 10 Kashmiris. The most militarized zone, not a lot of people know.
No.
And I think in conflict zones, everyone becomes a storyteller. Everyone has a story. Stories of oppression, stories of loss, stories of grief, or resilience, which are kind of, shared quietly within the families or close circles, because I can speak about Kashmir.
Yeah.
In fact, my grandmother, she was an amazing storyteller. Even at 75, she passed away in 2016. I remember, time spent with her. Even at 75, she would recount stories of the anti-Muslim violence of 1947 that took place in the Jammu region in great and vivid details. And with what I had gone through, seen while growing up in my childhood, that trauma, I started to, observe things very closely. And my teenage years were kind of, filled with extreme anger as I absorbed everything happening around me. And I struggled to find an outlet for these emotions, because when you see so much stuff going around, and especially people my age, they either had two options, or just a few options, not two, a bunch of options. And some chose to pick up a gun and go disappear in the mountains and fight. And there were others who chose pen. And I decided to choose pen to tell the stories of my people. And it was around the age of 15 when I began writing for local newspapers. And later, when I moved to Srinagar for college, my journalism career took off. In fact, I started working as a reporter in my second year itself. My days would be a mix of attending classrooms in the morning and reporting on human rights, politics, and whatnot for the rest of the day. And I even briefly did photojournalism, covering encounters between Indian security forces and Kashmiri militants. And sometimes I would find myself in a situation where I wasn't sure whether I would make it back to the class next day. And I had this habit. It was around 2015, late 2015. I started this practice of keeping a slip of a paper in my pocket with my dad's phone number and address, just in
Sure.
case.
Just in case, you never know.
Well, as journalists
Yeah.
ourselves, we'd say you chose the mightier weapon.
Yeah,
Well-
and I had kind of, developed this weird hobby. So while covering protests, this strange hobby of collecting tear gas canisters, many of which were expired. So they would
Wow.
fire tear gas canisters. And one time I remember in 2015, I was covering this protest in the southern Kashmir. And there was just these women who were marching, protesting, shouting slogans, approaching a security forces picket. And I was in the middle, and they all of a sudden started firing in the air, AKs, and then firing pellet guns and tear gas shells at the women protesters. And I was right in front of them, and one tear gas shell just landed in front of me. I was just like, I couldn't. But one thing I made sure was I get the
Gonna
hold
grab
of
it.
that empty canister.
Raqib, do you put these canisters on a shelf in your room? What do you do with these canisters?
Reminders?
They are all lost. So I
No.
left Kashmir in 2020, and since then I'm in exile, self-exile. That's how I call it. In fact, when I moved in 2020, I couldn't even leave with my cameras. I reunited with my cameras in 2022, and when I met my parents outside of somewhere in a third country in 2022, the first thing they were like, "What are the things that you want us to bring for you?" I was like, number one, I want my cameras, and number two, just get some soil in a piece of paper so I could just touch it.
Right. So the tear gas canisters did not make the top of the list.
No,
This one-
no.
That's understandable.
Let's talk about the self-exile. You talked earlier this year about the reporting that got you into trouble, quote, what caught the attention of the Indian government. That sort of was the road to you leaving your home country. So can you talk about what that reporting was? Give us a time frame. I think it was right before another Modi election. But can you kind of just walk us through that and how you ended up in the States?
Yeah. In fact, it was not right before it was right after Modi's election in 2019. And in 2019, on the August the 5th, Prime Minister Modi and his party, his government, they rescinded Kashmir's special status and revoked its autonomy that was granted under the Article 370 of Indian Constitution. And they also revoked Article 35A of the Indian Constitution that provided special rights to Kashmiris, including the provision that Indians cannot have land ownership rights in Kashmir, and which was very exclusive to the native Kashmiris. And what the government also did was they sliced the entire Jammu and Kashmir into two regions. Remember, I told you about Jammu division, Kashmir division, and the Ladakh. So they clubbed Jammu and Kashmir and separated Ladakh and made both of them as union territories to be federally governed directly from Delhi by the Modi's party. So because this was something that Kashmiris feared for a long time, that they would revoke our autonomy and fully trample down on the region. And with the Article 35A, with the land ownership, there was a big fear that this government particularly, could use it to change demography of the region. And unfortunately, that is what has happened after that, 2019. So when that happened in August of 2019, the Indian government cracked down on the region. They cut down the communication lines. The telephone was shut down. The internet was cut down. They sent in thousands of additional troops. Imagine 1 for 10. Now, after 2019, the ratio was much lesser. So more troops, and we can come out of our houses for anything, for any movement. We had to get permissions. For months altogether, there was this complete blanket crackdown on every Kashmiri. Political leaders were jailed. People who, the leaders who called for either the independence of Kashmir or Kashmir's secession from India, they were jailed. They were sent to different jails across India. Thousands of other people who had a previous record of participating in protests, they were arrested. Journalists were jailed. So there was just this total environment of doom and gloom around us. And I was at home in August of 2015, the entire month. And around 15th or 16th of August, I started getting these visits from the intelligence officers, from the Intelligence Bureau. So it's India's FBI. And I got visited by them thrice. And it was in relation to a story that I had done on August of 8th, because after the communication blackout, most of the Kashmiri journalists couldn't file their dispatches because there was no internet. And some of the journalists who were able to make that happen was through this process of going to the nearby airport, writing stories, putting in a pen drive, sending it someone to Delhi, and then mailing them out. But fortunately, I was in the Jammu region in Doda, and months back, I had returned from my reporting stint in China. And one thing that I had learned was, and of course, with our history of frequent internet shutdowns, the telephone, the mobile internet shutdowns, I installed a landline and a broadband, the wired internet. So they hadn't cut that down yet, because that was important for government officials to, maintain comms and all. So I was able to still stay in touch with the outside world through internet, and I was able to file that first dispatch. And I still remember it was for the Globe Post. The headline of the story was, quote, "We will fight till the end. Kashmir reacts to India rescinding special status." And that caught the attention of the intelligence agencies. They started interrogating me, coming to my house. Okay, what do you do? What is your history? Okay, our officers want to meet you. So I was scared. I was like, if I go and visit them, they'll just put me in jail or do something else, because there's no communication, nothing. No one knows anything about anyone else. And my parents were not home that time. They were away on a religious pilgrimage. So it was a scary period. And then I got in touch with the CPJ, and they asked me to relocate. And I was relocated to Delhi. I was underground for like a month. And then when I went back, I started doing normal stuff, but it was around August of 2020. In fact, a few weeks before that when we had that incident where someone tried to forcibly enter our house in the middle of the night. And as I said earlier, we have a history of unknown gunmen showing up and bumping our family members up. So I was like, I need to go out until things cool down, because my parents were extremely scared. My dad would sleep in my room, and he would tell me like, "Hey, if something happens, I'm here too. Don't worry," and all. And I wasn't allowed to go out. And then finally, because we were still reeling under that crackdown, and we really didn't know what was going to happen. Then and I finally made this decision. Let me go out, because me being home was also a security risk for my family, my brother. So I just didn't want to. I just didn't want anything to happen to them. So I decided, okay, I'll move abroad for some time. And US was the only country, because it was a peak COVID, and US was the only country that was still allowing people to come in. And I had a B1 B2 visa. I came in. It was supposed to be a few months, but then the targeting of my family and myself is just expanded. They were just actively looking for me around September and October of 2020. I started getting calls from police officers in there. Hey, we want to meet you. Where are you? And then army officers would call my father. One time my father was called to army camp, and usually they call it courtesy call. Hey, come over, a cup of tea. And then they told my dad towards the end of the conversations to tell me not to do what I'm doing.
We'll be back with more from Raqib Hameed Naik. Stay tuned. This Giving Tuesday, we're spotlighting HRF's global initiatives and the impact we're making together in the struggle for freedom and democracy. And here's something special. When you make a gift anytime this month, you'll automatically enter the raffle to win 2 patron passes to the 2025 Oslo Freedom Forum in Norway from May 26th to 28th. Join us this Giving Tuesday in supporting the power of generosity and stand with us in the global movement against tyranny.
And we're back. Let's get back to our conversation with Raqib.
Raqib, you haven't been back to India for years, and yet your family is still feeling the brunt of this pressure from Indian authorities because of your work and because they are upset about how you are helping shine a light again on the atrocities on the ground in places like Kashmir. You know, we associate these kinds of pressure techniques with the Chinese government, with the Russian government, with the Iranian government for those who are exiled and still have family members, whether it's parents or siblings back in the country. That is absolutely a key tactic of things like transnational repression, to continue to use those levers of power to target those who are outside of the country. This is the Indian government doing this to you, which I think a lot of folks who are outside of India, who maybe have not been following political developments in India as closely as they should have, would be surprised by that these exact same techniques we see in the Chinas and the Russias are now taking place under the BJP, under Modi in India. Are you surprised by the lengths they have gone to continue targeting you and your family?
Personally, as a Kashmiri, I'm not surprised at all, because this is something that was always happening. Especially, I mean, with Kashmiris before BJP coming to power as well, but after BJP came to power, the very thin-skinned government, they just go after any and every critic, no matter whether they're in India or abroad. And I think what happened last year, the assassination of Canadian Sikh leader Niger, and then attempted assassination of another Sikh leader in New York, and these recent revelations by the Canadian government that Indian diplomats were involved in this entire operation cycle of violence, extortion, targeting the Sikh community. So this has happened. This has come to fore in just last 2 years, and on top of that, we have cases where the Indian government has revoked the overseas citizenship cards of Indian Americans who are critics of the regime. There's one particular case of a Kashmiri journalist who is right now here in the US. Her passport was suspended last year while she was still here. And there are people who need visas to visit their families back home. Their visas are not being granted. There are activists and journalists whose families back home are harassed, including myself. So there is this entire, thing at play that are being deployed, the methods being deployed by the Indian government and its officers against the critics and dissidents, both within India and abroad. But on top of transnational repression, they have also added this element of transnational disinformation campaigns, where they are weaponizing internet, social media platforms to run smear campaigns against critics. In fact, last year, it's an interesting story. Last year, there was this one website, and they have a Twitter handle with almost 50,000 followers. It's called Disinfo. Now, a lot of people who hear this name, they think, oh, it's the EU Disinfo maybe. But it's a knockoff version of EU Disinfo. You don't know who the people are who run it. There are no names, nothing. But they publish this comprehensive report by including facts and then disinformation, targeting critics. And they had put this one, targeted post against me, accusing me of being funded by Pakistan. And this is something like in India, especially with with the conflict between both the countries, it's easier for anyone to accuse you of being Pakistani, and then the next thing, if you're a Muslim, is jail.
Yeah.
So
Absolutely.
so they published this entire thing, but then of course, like, I countered it, facts and all, because of course my family is still in Kashmir. They could use that to go after my family, jail my
Yeah.
family members. So what happened was, in December of last year, Washington Post did an investigative piece on Disinfo Lab, and they found out it was being run by an officer with India's external intelligence agency called RAW.
Yeah.
It
Yeah,
was a
directly.
government operation. Yes, directly tying it to the government.
Yeah.
And
Right.
they were producing this disinformation, and Prime Minister Modi and Hindu nationalist groups have a good base here in the US. And some of those groups run advocacy organizations on Capitol Hill. And this disinformation was also making its way to the halls of Congress.
And again, Raqib, these are the similar techniques, the similar tactics that we see from other authoritarian regimes around the world, and yet do not, for whatever reason, continue to be associated with Modi's government in India. Again, I think it's worth reminding listeners that, Raqib, if I remember correctly, before he was prime minister, back when he was running the Indian state of Gujarat, he had his visa revoked by the United States of America because of his role, his leadership role in anti-Muslim pogroms, massacres in the state of Gujarat. And yet, of course, when he becomes prime minister, that visa ban is revoked. So in a certain sense, this is a continuation of the kind of leadership and tactics he exhibited before his prime ministership, before his premiership, and of course has just continued and accelerated in the years since. I did want to talk about one other thing in terms of Indian politics before we bring it to what you're working on right now, Raqib. The recent Indian elections of just a few months ago did not seem to go quite as BJP and Modi's government expected. It seemed like there was more pushback in terms of the votes against BJP or for BJP's opponents. Can you tell us a little bit about your impression of how the most recent elections in India went from just a few months ago? Is the maybe celebratory attitude of India reclaiming some of its democracy, is that overblown? Is the worst behind us? Where are things in terms of India's domestic democracy right now, if we're talking about federal elections?
Of course, I think before answering that question, I just wanted to add something to what you said, and that is an interesting point that you made about Modi while he was leading the state of Gujarat. And I think the Gujarat model is now the pan-India model, and that is what people usually talk about when they see what is happening throughout India. And now with the transnational repression, this transnational assassination campaign that was exposed last year, now they're also trying to export this Gujarat model to internationally. So I think, yeah, that's a very accurate assessment of who Modi is. I mean, to be very honest, if he wasn't a prime minister, he would be in jail.
Yeah.
He's a criminal. He's a criminal. He's a religious bigot who should be in jail. And I think the way he operates his party and the way he has been operating the country is as if he's some cartel leader.
There is a reason so many of these regimes resemble in so many ways organized crime, right? That linkage,
Exactly.
those models have so much overlap, some point to being almost identical to one another. Sorry, I interrupted you, Ricky.
Exactly. So what is happening in India right now is we are witnessing a country under siege from Modi's far-right Hindu nationalist ideology, and which has, taken over almost every aspect of the society, politics, and governance. And the last decade under his rule has been extremely challenging phase in the history of Muslims and Christians, secular Hindus, caste oppressed groups, Sikhs, journalists, and critics in India. It's a very challenging phase. And what we are witnessing is an intense and systemic persecution of minorities, and an outright attempt to reduce Muslims to second-class citizenship through discriminatory policies, constant hate, religious extremism, and violence. What we have been constantly seeing over the years, this surge of hate crimes targeting Muslims and Christians, which have, soared with each passing year. A Muslim can be lynched today in India on mere suspicion of consuming or trading beef or cattle. Casey, do you eat beef?
Not as much as I used to, but yes, from time to time.
What about you, Elisha?
Yes, 100%.
So just imagine, I want you to imagine, like, for just that piece of small meat, whether it's beef or not, you could be lynched, you could be killed in India. Just like it's crazy, right? Like in one part of the world we're living right now, and then in another part of the world, for the very same luxuries that we have, very same freedoms we have, people are getting killed.
Well, can you kind of wend into the work that you're doing now with that, with India Hate Lab and Hindutva TV, if that's how you pronounce it,
Hindutva
and how you're
watch.
tracking
Hindutva.
that? Thank you.
And
Watch,
Raqib,
yeah.
also, can you actually define Hindutva for a lot of listeners who aren't maybe familiar with that as a governing or identity ideology? What is Hindutva for those who have been following?
Hindutva is a political ideology called Hindu nationalism or Hindu supremacy, Hindu supremacism, which claims that India is a land that only belongs to Hindus. And it claims that Muslims and Christians are outsiders. They ought to be treated as enemies, and they don't belong to this land. They should be ethnically cleansed, should be kicked out of India. And if they have to stay, they have to convert to Hinduism as a religion and adopt Hindu practices. And this ideology is followed by Prime Minister Modi. And in fact, this ideology is promoted by this group called Rashtriya Swayamsevak Sangh, a militant paramilitary organization started in 1925. And its second founder, M.S. Gulwalkar, wrote this book, We, the Nationhood Defined. And in that book, he had this chapter called the Internal Enemies. And in that chapter, he names Muslims and Christians as top two enemies of the country. And Modi went on to work for the RSS for almost 2 decades before he transitioned to his political party, the BJP, which is the political wing of the RSS, by the way. So we have the man who worked with the RSS, a fascist paramilitary organization leading India right now. So whatever democracy we think, because again, fascism, democracy is a contradiction of, like, just polar paths, right? So someone who believes in fascist ideas, how is he supposed to lead a democracy? Or if we give him a democracy to run, of course he's going to turn it into fascism, a fascist state. And that's what Modi is actually doing. He's dismantling all the institutions that once made up this democracy. The legislature today is passing discriminatory laws targeting Muslims. They passed this Discriminatory Citizenship Amendment Act that, in conjunction with the National Register of Citizens, could be used to strip millions of Indian Muslims and throw them into detention centers. The legislatures today are passing laws on basis of conspiracy theories, like love jihad. Love jihad is this conspiracy theory in India which accuses Muslims of running running a conspiracy to entrap Hindu women into love and convert them to Islam, so that they can skew the Indian population and install a Muslim prime minister or a president in future. On basis of these laws, BJP-ruled states are passing, on basis of these conspiracy theories, BJP-ruled states are passing laws. And there are love jihad laws in state of Uttar Pradesh. If any Muslim is accused of love jihad, he could be jailed for 10 years. There are laws being passed in conspiracy theory of spit jihad, that Muslims spit into the food so that, to make Hindus impure. And recently, Uttar Pradesh state, again, ruled by the BJP, they want to pass a law and jail people who spit into food. And then institutions like the executive, the police, have been completely saffronized, completely radicalized. In one state of Uttar Pradesh, we have been tracking since last year, they're doing these half encounters. So people who engage in cattle transport or in transport or sale of beef, and they're mostly Muslims, they're catching them and they're shooting them in the leg. And this year alone, until now, we have tracked more than 200 cases.
Well, so Raqib,
Muslim men, yeah.
let's talk about this. Where it intersects with your work, because what you're talking about are all these different examples that are happening. But again, I think a lot of folks just aren't aware that these actually stories, these policies, these programs are taking place. I know Elisha mentioned in the question HinduTvaWatch.org and India Hate Lab. Just while we have you for a few more minutes at least, can you talk to us a little bit about that? And again, how you are continuing your work, even though you are in exile, continuing your work as a journalist to shine a light on at least some of these crimes that continue to take place in India.
Sure. Hindutva Watch is a hate tracker where we track, document and archive videos, stories of hate crimes and hate speeches. And at India Hate Lab, we mostly do research on hate speech, disinformation, conspiracy theories. And over the last 4 years, we have documented over 4,000 videos, 4,000 cases with visual evidence of hate crimes and hate speeches. And this work has been very impactful in terms of putting spotlight on the ongoing scale of the persecution of religious minorities in the country, especially when the government couldn't completely shut us down because we are operating from the US. But as this work got more traction, was used by lawyers to file petitions in the Supreme Court, was used on the police to pressure the police to file police cases against people who were calling for genocide of Muslims, who were indulging in hate crimes, doing hate crimes. So a lot of this work was used for that. And as soon as it got traction, the government earlier this year decided to block both our websites in India under an emergency order. They issued me multiple notices to come to India and appear in person before the Interministerial Committee to explain, quote unquote, why I was doing anti-India work. So that happened, and they also geo-blocked our X handle. So the government wrote to Twitter to block our handle so that people in India cannot, access it, and Twitter complied, X complied. And then I moved to the court, filed the lawsuit against both the government and Twitter. One petition on the X blocking and another petition on the website blocking. And in the X blocking case, it has turned a bit interesting. Last month during the hearing, X has come out in our support, saying that the government ban on it. So for the first time in India that X has done that. They have come out openly in support of support against the account blocking. And in the court, they have clearly written in the affidavit that the block on Hindutva Watch was illegal, unjustified and disproportionate. So that's where we are. But unfortunately, the reality is that the big tech, the social media platform, wherever it is convenient for them, they also work with these authoritarian regimes to censor critics. For example, X, you take the example of X in Brazil, they pushed back went to an extent publishing everything online, blocking order that was supposed to be confidential. But in this particular case in India, they're not even giving me a copy of blocking order. The simple reason why they have blocked my account. And then when I move to the court, they do this PR gimmick of being the free speech proponent by coming in my support, but at the same time, telling the judge that we can give you the blocking order, but in a sealed cover, only to the judge, not me.
Well, we're close to the end of our time here, so I wanted to ask you one last question, which is, what would you like people to know, either about the work that you're doing, what's going on in your country, something to know, take away, do?
I would definitely encourage everyone to educate themselves, because education is the number one thing that we can do, even though we cannot directly do something for the people. So educating yourself and educating others. And there are so many opportunities, especially with me being here. Now we have started Center for the Study of Organized Hate. India Hate Lab is the India project of the center. We are based in DC, and we are expanding our focus to broader South Asia, Southeast Asian region. We want to implement what we learned in India in the other spaces as well. So we are expanding our research, and I think research data is the key to make policy changes happen. And I would really appreciate people to join us in whatever capacity they can. But at the meantime, keep holding their governments accountable as well for allowing these authoritarian leaders to do what they're doing, especially with people in the U.S. They need to keep pushing their lawmakers, the government, to make sure that in the garb of promoting U.S.-India relations to counter China, they don't cross that line of authoritarianism and embrace a person who has a history of committing violence against religious minorities and whose policies could potentially lead India to a brink of a civil war.
Well, keep up the good work and keep wielding that pen.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Thanks so much, Raqib.
Of course. Thank you.
Thanks for joining us for today's conversation with Raqib Hameed Naik.
This episode is produced and engineered by Omar Al-Fotihi and edited by Talia Edgar-Chalker. Our intern is Sage Gibson.
Dissidents and Dictators is a production of the Human Rights Foundation, a nonpartisan, nonprofit organization that promotes and protects human rights globally with a focus on closed societies. We promote freedom where it's most at risk in countries ruled by authoritarian regimes.